The topic is email threads. It's hard to talk about just email threads without giving some context. So, couple of things to start things off. This is not so much a prepared lecture. I don't have time to prepare lectures these days, what with directories and Zoom meetings and all this stuff. But it's more of a workshop, and I think this stuff is very interesting. Just sort of how email works, and how threads fit into the picture, and the history of all of this. Maybe not all of you are quite as interested in that, but still, I think email threads are such an important feature of email programs. And as far as I know, all modern up-to-date email programs have them, offer them, let you use them, and I think they're just tremendously valuable. And so so I think this is a worthwhile talk for everybody. You don't have to be using the same mail software that I use. I happen to use Thunderbird as a standalone mail client that's installed on my PC, or all of my PCs, and it's actually a sister program to Firefox because both of them come from Mozilla. So it's a really solid, high-quality mail program. Has good features, but not too many features, because that's one of the dangers with mail programs these days. And I also happen to use Gmail as my mail service, with Google as my mail service provider. And so, but when you use Gmail and some of those other programs, Gmail is willing to be the receiver of your mail, but then to download it to your local mail app for you to manage it locally through a mail app. But I can still see all the same email through a web client, through a web browser, and use the native Gmail interface, which is in a web browser. And I use that and Thunderbird. More or less equal amounts, because there are some features of mail clients that I really think are much easier for me and I like a lot better than the Gmail view of the world. But there are certain things which I can do in Gmail which are really hard to do in as well in a mail client. And by the way, the most important one of those is searching for mail. I got a lot of mail, and I've got a lot of folders full of old mail. And with Gmail, I can find things instantly. And with a mail client like Thunderbird, oh my God, you could spend hours looking for something. It's just like night and day. So, you get the best of both worlds if you combine two different mail services that way. So I'm just curious, before we get going, how many people out there, you can raise your virtual hand to answer this question. We'll just have some yes, no. Wait a second. Let me get you all on the screen here. Chat. Oh, there we go. So how many of you actually do have a Gmail account, whether or not you use it as your primary mail program? Okay. I'm only seeing 7. Well, I expected to see more. Few more people. Well, wait. Let me start
There are
off.
raised hands too, Paul.
Oh God, yeah. So look, yeah. So we all get centered on this little query. Oh yeah, yeah. There's a bunch of hands. You know what? Okay. So I guess a raised hand means yes. So I got 6 of those. I got 13 of those and 6 green yes checks. So now, and then now it says, so there's 21 of those. There's only one person who actually checked the red X, which means explicitly no, I guess. And okay, so that's how many have actual Gmail accounts. So let me clear all that feedback, and let me ask another question. How many of you use Thunderbird? I'm guessing not many. Just actually, it's better if you check the green check rather than a raised hand, but whatever. So it's really only 3 or 4, and of course I do. So let's call that 4 that use Thunderbird. But that's okay, because in my view, Thunderbird there's nothing special about it. It's a very typical mail app of traditional look and feel, and I'll say in a minute what that means. And there are lots of mail client programs that basically have the same look and feel. You know, cosmetically they're different, but the same structure of what you see on the screen and how you navigate the mail is pretty much the same. It's like driving cars, you know. If you want to drive a Subaru and you've only been driving Hondas, nobody needs to give you any instruction. You kind of get in the seat and you know what to do because it's all very familiar. That's what I mean by a generic mail client. The basic operations are pretty much all the same, and a few cosmetic details are different. So, how many of you use Outlook? Now, actually, as far as I can tell, and I was baffled by Microsoft, the world of Microsoft, but I think there is something that's called an Outlook mail client that runs on your computer like the traditional mail programs always did. So how many of you do that? And I'm seeing 8, 10, 15. Oh, no, wait. No, only about 5. There's 6 actual no's. Okay, fine. So how many of you use Outlook in the cloud, which I'm not even sure. Is that same thing as Outlook 365 or something? But it's really a web-based mail program. And Microsoft uses the same term for both, so I always get confused. You might not know the difference. So wait a second, I didn't clear the feedback. So how many of you use what I would call Outlook in the cloud through a web browser, like presumably Edge, because that's what Microsoft prefers you use? Okay, just a few of those. Now, does anybody else use Gmail, but connected to a standalone mail client, like I was just saying? Does anybody else? Wait a second, I'm going to clear. I'm going to clear all the feedback. I guess the feedback's clear. So how many other people do what I was just describing? Close the chat. Okay. Joel and John Tomaszewski, you're the only 2 partners in crime here. Okay, that's great. I just wanted to get a sense of what everybody knows. So again, here's a critical question. Clear the feedback. I guess it's already cleared. Joel probably did that. Thank you, Joel. What would I do without Joel?
Fast fingers, what can I tell you?
You know, we're kind of a team here. Anyway, how many of you know about mail threads? Think you have a pretty clear idea what a mail thread is, and actually use them? Okay. So,
Paul, that might be sort of a complicated question, at least from my perspective, because I sort of know what a mail thread is,
but that's right. I get it. You know,
but I don't use it.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm just sort of getting a general sense. You know, and you know, I meant to do this. This should always be the first question. How many of you know how to raise your hand or click the green yes button in the reactions, on the reactions button? Because if you're not able to do that, then I don't know whether your answers on the next questions are actually no's or just can't answer. So it's not everybody. So it looks like there are actually a few people, who either can't do that, or probably in the case of Mitch Erickson, he probably is not. He's probably wandered off and will return.
I'm here.
Oh, but you didn't raise a hand to answer my question. Thank you. Anyway, It's pretty good. I mean, this is Tug after all, so I'd expect you guys to all know how to do that. Although I do understand that on other kinds of devices, like an iPhone, it's not so easy to raise a hand. Okay, so now sort of getting back to the topic at hand. Um, I was fortunate to have been at Bell Labs back in the oh, 70s, late 70s. I actually went there in 1971. So during the 70s and the 80s, um, and Al Aho and probably a couple other people on this call were there too in that time. And this was a period of time. Well, first of all, when I got there was no such thing as email. Do you remember? There used to be life without email. It's hard to remember. It was so long ago, and we're so totally dependent on it right now. But yeah, it wasn't email. As a matter of fact, there was no such thing as computer networking, or virtually not at all. There were a few sort of hand-built systems here and there, but it was not ubiquitous. And we didn't have screens that had images on them. We were starting to get, these all text terminals, we would call them. All they could do is text. And the early ones didn't even have CRTs on them, didn't have screens, and we just print out on paper, but nevertheless, at Bell Labs, a pretty high-tech place, research and everything. So early on, all employees at Bell Labs got issued either terminals that would connect to our mainframe, or a little bit later we would all get Unix workstations. Unix was invented there, so so we had access to Unix, and especially with Unix, there evolved computer networking. See, when we were just using terminals and all connected to a big mainframe, that's not quite the same as networking. There's only one computer, but we all can connect to it. Nevertheless, we had ways that we could send information amongst ourselves at Bell Labs within that location, and people start sending information messages one way or another, whatever the networking protocols were in those days. But out of that, and there were other places in the country where that sort of thing was happening, other research companies and universities especially. So out of these very early attempts to just kind of send informal messages to people that you knew how to connect to through the computer networking that was installed, there evolved this thing called the Arpanet, which was ARPA was the Army Advanced Research Projects Administration, and they contracted various institutions, mostly universities, but some companies like Bell Labs and a few others, and they would contract with these people to do research that was, relevant to the Army, but it wasn't just weapons and stuff. Communications was essential, and so Bell Labs, had a lot of contracts, and so the ARPA people who had researchers in various places decided it was really useful for them to be able to communicate with each other, because there was joint work being done in different locations on the same projects, and so this whole community of researchers evolved. Al, you probably, I was just in the trenches, so I wasn't organizing this stuff, but I hope what I'm saying is roughly accurate. And so people devised this thing called the Arpanet, which would extend in-house networking to between location networking, and even between different companies. So universities and Bell Labs, the people doing all this work could participate in this kind of networking. And email evolved in those days as a sort of a more formal way to send information around, and sort of a structured information packets, and then eventually got to be called email, electronic mail. And it turned out that the other people in those companies, even if they weren't working on these ARPA research projects, they got the benefit of being in a company where these these facilities and capabilities and these devices were sort of made available to everyone. And so, this is ancient history and all this stuff, but it was a number of years, it was not until Al Gore showed up on the scene and invented the internet, which of course was ridiculous because he didn't invent it at all. But what did happen with Bill Clinton and Al Gore was that the government was underwrote the extension of the Arpanet, which had been an internal government research project basically, and to commercialize that. In other words, to take what had been Arpanet and extend it to everybody and have companies rather than research organizations, just telephone companies and cable TV companies create this much larger version of the Arpanet, and it's called the internet, and that's what evolved into what we have today. So along the line, email started. It was a very primitive thing, and right from the get-go, an email, electronic mail, whatever we called it in those days, as soon as it started getting structured at all, it was structured as a series of header lines, and each header line had a name and a colon and some information. And there would be a series of these header lines, and then there'd be a blank line to distinguish that from what was the body of the email. So that was always the structure of email right from the get-go. And the original header fields were called from and to and CC for carbon copy and reply all and forward and subject, of course. In the beginning, that's about all there was. It was a very simple, primitive thing. And then, especially in Unix and later other venues, they wrote a program called Mail, which basically displayed these packets of information, which we were calling email, in a kind of a structured way that's very familiar to all of you. And the header lines would show at the top, and you'd see the header name and the colon and the value, and then there'd be a blank line, and there would be the body. And so the data object that got sent was pretty much the same as what you saw on the screen. And so it wasn't too long before, and we all started using this stuff. One of the features was that when you click reply or reply all or forward, it would clone the subject line in the new mail that it was setting up for you to send out. That was one thing. Subject line got cloned and tagged along. And also, you could send mail, even pretty much from the beginning, you could send mail to several people at once. Just put extra email addresses on the to line or the CC line. And then when you did a reply or forward or reply all, especially reply all, it would clone all of the other recipients of the original mail. And so, lo and behold, we could carry on email-based conversations amongst a group of people, a work group at Bell Labs, say. And it was a very informal thing. And somebody would kick it off with an email to a bunch of people and with something relevant in the subject line. And then everybody else that wanted to jump in and give their 2 cents, they'd hit reply all. And it would go back to everybody. It would have the same subject line, and they'd add their 2 cents. And there were attachments. Somewhere along the line, attachments became a feature. And so maybe, you had some sort of a Word file, or it wasn't even Word in those days, but, some other file that you wanted to share. And you could attach that, and then those attachments would tag along as well. And so we would have these email-based conversations, and one of the features of these mail programs right from the get-go was that you could sort on different ones of the header lines. So you could sort on the date, see the most recent mail at the top or the bottom, or you could sort on the sender and see all the email from some particular person. It's a little harder to sort on a bunch of names in a two-line. Can't really do that. It's just the first one, and or you can sort on the subject line. So why is it called an email thread? Well, the canonical view of your mailbox, and maybe call it an inbox somewhere along the line, that term became popular. The normal view of it would be chronological, the newest at the top, but you'd be getting email from different people on different things. So if there was one of these conversations on a particular topic with a group of people, all having the same subject line, those emails would be interspersed with other emails in your mailbox. And that's probably why it was called a thread. I think of a sewing thread and a piece of cloth, and the thread only makes an appearance on the surface at certain places, and the rest of the time it's underneath, and other things are going on. So it's like these emails in this conversation are like the thread that only shows up at certain places in your inbox. And of course you could sort on the subject line, and that would sort of collect them all together, and then you could sort of work your way, if you wanted to go back and see what else was said and see how things connect up. Well, we did that for some time. It was all very informal, and I think we were already calling them threads, but I'm not sure. But there were issues with that. One was that mainly it was the subject line that was used to define, an informal mail thread. The trouble with the subject line is that somebody in the conversation might decide to change the subject a little bit, like maybe shift the direction of the conversation. You need a shifted subject line. And then as soon as you change the subject line, it sort of logically gets disconnected from the mail thread, because that is the identifier for the thread. Another problem was that, a simple subject line, you could have a great conversation about it, the conversation's over, but then somebody happens to use the same word or short phrase for a different conversation, and suddenly it's going to look like it's part of an earlier conversation when it really isn't. So that was another problem with that kind of informal threading. And there was another problem, and this was true then, it's still true today, and that is that oftentimes the group of people on a given mail thread, maybe the people in your department or the people who are working on a particular project with you, you have this conversation, and then you go off and do something else for a few months, and then the project's over, but the group of people still work together on various things. So somebody else wants to send an email to that group of people, and they're lazy. Instead of going and finding all their email addresses again and compiling a new two-line they just dig up an old email from an old mail thread, and they hit reply all to that to kick off a new conversation. Well, now suddenly you're explicitly starting a new conversation that is technically still part of an old mail thread. And people still do that to this day. And for anybody who is actually using mail threads as a way for sorting through their volumes of email, that creates an enormous amount of confusion, and frankly causes me to overlook new emails that are coming in because they get sorted into the wrong places in my mailbox. So that's like not a good practice. So having said all those things, what I want to do now is show you. First of all, I'm going to start off by showing you some of these things on in Thunderbird, but I'm going to do the screen share from my laptop here because I've got sort of a pristine copy of Thunderbird installed, and I haven't added colors or anything else to enhance the views of things, so it's just sort of like Thunderbird out of the box, and therefore really like a generic mail program. So So hold on a second. I'm just going to do a screen share here. I'm in Zoom. I'm going to do a screen share. And okay. I guess you can all see that, right? By the way, you know, I'm doing most of the talking. If somebody wants to chime in and put in their 2 cents, I mean, you can do that as long as it's really just 2 cents and not $2. We want to keep the main thing going here.
Well, Paul,
So,
a quick
yeah.
comment. Just since you have this view up, it really relates to what I was going to mention. If you have a string and everyone's done the reply all correctly, you don't really need all the previous emails. If you have the very top one, the most recent one, have all the previous conversations. Is that usually correct or always correct or not really?
Well, that's a good question to hold till later.
Okay.
So you'll see how this stuff actually works.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, there are issues about, you know, if you go into the middle of a thread, you know, yeah, if you've actually read all the earlier ones, you know, and you remember what they said, you know, maybe you don't need them anymore. But sometimes you need to go back because you remember vaguely, but you need some details. Another problem with email threads, which is still with us today, is that you have these people working merrily together and exchanging information, then some new person joins the group. And yeah, they don't have all those older emails from that thread. So, you know, getting a new person caught up is still a challenge.
Yeah, good point. Thanks.
You know, I'm not sure where your question falls exactly in that spectrum, but there are a bunch of questions like that. So anyway, here's a sort of a typical view. And you know, there's a list of emails that have come into my inbox, and in the early days, I don't think we had mail folders, just the mailbox, just the inbox, and maybe there was another thing called deleted mail that was like a trash thing, so you could recover stuff, and maybe something different called sent mail, so you could distinguish the emails you sent from all the rest. Okay, so here's a bunch of sort of bare bones email that's in time order. Okay, but you notice I can click on a header line. I'm sure you all do this or have done it with some mail clients. I can click on date, or it's actually date and time, and sort it chronologically, earliest to latest, or this way. I click again. Now it's sorted from most recent to oldest. Or you can click on the correspondence. That's probably not a good one to be showing here, because that's a little bit. Actually, another feature later on, when more mail header fields came into being, you could select the mail headers that you want to actually see, which I'm doing now. I hope you know about this. This is pretty useful. I want the from, and I also want the to, or it's called recipient here. These are, as I say, sort of the basic fields: from, to, date, subject. Notice also, and this is typical of these mail programs, you know, you can click the header lines and you can sort the mail forward or backward on any one of these fields. You can increase the size of a given field by dragging this vertical line separating the header names. You hover over it, it turns into a left-right arrow, and I can drag it right and left, and that's useful. Maybe I want to, maybe there's some long, some long list of recipients and or whatever. So that can be pretty useful. But now you can see that there are some emails here that are obviously part of a conversation because they have the same subject line. Well, you know, as I said, I could sort on the subject line, and then there's a bunch that are clearly meant to be some sort of a conversation among some people. But you know, the mail program that I'm using can help me understand the threading structure of the emails in my inbox. So in Thunderbird, I can click this, and optionally I can change to a threaded view of my inbox. So I can either have the raw view, which is the very old-fashioned way, or I click this, and look what happens. It collects the emails that really are part of one mail thread. It collects them together in groups. And the head one in the group is all the way out to the left, and then you see there's this line coming down and across, and then the subsequent ones fall below the original ones, and the indenting shows the actual relationships of the emails in this group of things. So in this case, Frank Bolden, who was actually a member of Old Guard, sent me an email, and I replied to it. So my reply is connected to his original one, and it's indented. And then he replied to mine, so he's now connected to my reply, but indirectly connected to the one that was at the head of the thread. Now here's a more complicated thread. Again, it kicked off by Frank Bolden, and but something slightly different happened here. You can see that Penny Vigilante replied to Frank, but then, and Heather Pistel replied to Penny. But look, Frank Bolden didn't reply to Heather. He replied to Penny too. So these two emails are at the same level, directly underneath this one, to which they both replied. And, you know, again, working your way down, you can see that Nancy Mayan replied directly to the original email in the thread, and Mark Miller replied, and so did Caroline Dorflinger, and then Mark Miller replied to Carolyn. So this whole structure of who replied to whom in the thread is so beautifully crystal clear when you see this kind of presentation of mail threads with indentation of the dependent emails, let's say, that are follow-ups to earlier ones, and these little down arrows, these are what we call twisties in the business. That's a technical term that's used a lot, and it's pointing down now because this group of emails are all visible. But I can click on that, and it turns it to the right, and now that group of emails are all summarized by the one that was at the head of that group. Okay, so these little down pointing arrows can twist to the right, and then it closes that up. And this whole kind of presentation with all of these indentations and so on, and these twisties, this is what's called a tree structure. And this is a typical presentation of a tree structure in computer applications with a vertical layout. It is not just for email. I mean, for instance, I could show you my mail folders here, and you can see the folders themselves. I have a bunch of mail folders, and I don't know, somewhere I get them to appear. Oh, here we go. Now the mail folders. So I can sort mail into folders. And the folders, these are folders now. These are not email conversations. These are actual folders that I've dragged mail into from one folder to another. And lo and behold, they also have this tree structure with these twisties that open and close branches of the tree. This is a wonderful way to present a lot of complicated data, and, you know, computer scientists love this stuff. I'm sure Al does too. Maybe Al invented this display. You know, for all I know, he could be the one. But it's probably not new to computer science. Anyway, but let's not talk so much about folders now, but just sort of get back to the mail itself. Well, actually, I have to open the mail folders again because, come on, open. Oh, well, okay. So now you might say, well, does my mail program actually support mail threads and this indented tree structure view of them? And I think that most modern mail programs do. I hope they do. Maybe there are some other ways that these things are shown. And by the way, in just in passing, in Thunderbird, I can assign tags to emails, and then it changes how they appear in my mailbox. For instance, I can define this to be personal, and then it turns green, so you can sort of tag them with colors and do fun things like that. But that has really nothing to do with the mail threads. So let me stop that share and go back to my main computer. Now, I have to warn you that my main computer is a little unstable. It's an older computer. It has some memory issues. And sometimes when I do screen sharing on my main computer, which is this one, hopefully this will not crash anything. Tell me if you begin seeing this Outlook window. Ah, there it is. Now, this is Outlook 2013. But it's an installed app on my computer. I don't bother to update it because, frankly, I'm not interested in using Outlook. But my wife's computer was brand new, just a year old, and I got the latest and greatest Outlook 365 for her computer, and sometimes I sit down at her computer to help her with some stuff. And I don't think the Outlook looks all that different now than it did then. But the point I want to make here is, there are other things around the edges and so on, but it's still the same basic structure. We have a from, and we have a subject, and we have a time of received, and I can sort on these fields. And by the way, there are plenty of additional fields that you can pop in if you want, and you can still somehow, there, I right-clicked on this header line, and one of the items is field chooser. So yeah, I can choose to bring in, to hide, or display different columns. It's just like Thunderbird. I can move these columns around by dragging them. Pretty much the same paradigm. And yes, over on the left, there's mail folders, and yes, they have twisties, and I could have more levels of folders within folders and so on and so forth, and I could have, the basic elements are all the same. I mean, this is Outlook and the other is Thunderbird. Okay, so I just wanted to point out that you don't have to be using Thunderbird to use these principles, or Gmail, because as far as
I want to bring up one point. If you're
Yeah, sure.
using the Outlook internet web version, you don't get this kind of structure. It looks much different. You're frozen.
Maybe he needs another cup of coffee.
Well, Paul is frozen. I just want to mention something that I've used. Oh, he's back. Maybe he's not back. Anyhow, I just wanted to mention that one of the, I hear a lot of people complain because they get too much stuff in their mailbox with a lot of junk and their regular mail. And I found the best solution for that is to start another email address, and Google gives them, away for free. So, and then what you have two choices, of course. The easiest one is to let your friends and important things like banks and other important things to be in the one email address, and keep that one clean as possible by unsubscribing the stuff that gets in there by accident. And then use your old one, keep that so that you can notify people that you have a new email address and you want them to start using it, family and friends. And and then if you have notifications, you only put the notification on the one that's family and friends. And that way you can look at your other one, and you can keep it and go through it really quick every once in a while just to see what the junk mail is. And that really solved the solution of my email box filling up quite fast, for what it's worth.
If I might comment, I think we're getting some very good practical advice from everyone on this conversation, but particularly from Paul. But I, long time ago, was interested in how to classify a field or classify information. And I learned an awful lot from my secretary, because she had to keep track of an entire department of people, what their important deliverables were, what dates, and so on. And she had a marvelous filing system that allowed her to keep everybody on top of things in the department. And a lot depends on what you want to do with all the emails that you got. When I was at Columbia, I get an enormous number of emails from students, administrators, and so on. And I had to invent some kind of classification scheme to keep track of who I should pay attention to and by when. So I adopted a scheme that wasn't like threads, but I developed you might call it an ontology of files with a hierarchical structure that allowed me to say, these are students, these are my boss, these are my friends, my research colleagues, and so on. And I stored the emails into various folders in this hierarchy, and I found that very beneficial. What Paul is describing is some of the automation that a mail client like Thunderbird can do to facilitate this process. But somehow or another, you have to invent the classification scheme that you're going to use for your emails. And I noticed that Paul has an enormous number of different sources of email. And I don't know how he could keep up with all of these without the mail threads that he has. I haven't gone to such a use of mail threads, but I have found the hierarchy of files that I've created along with the grep program as a good way of keeping track of what I need to do. And if I have to refer to old students or old documentation, I can get access to it in this particular way. But there is a whole field of classification and how do you classify topics. And when I was studying this, when I was with the National Science Foundation, we were trying to classify the different subfields of computer science. When does a subfield become important enough that you should give it a special name? And I was flabbergasted when somebody presented the example of, supposing you have a classification scheme that has railroads in it, another classification in the same scheme that has songs. Where do you put railroad songs in that classification? Do you duplicate it in both entries, or do you just pick one? But then you have this problem of, where did I file railroad songs? So this is a very interesting and big topic of how do you classify and organize information, your own personal information and the information in a field. And I think there's no unique solution to it, but it's nice to have automation to help you organize your thoughts and your email messages so that you can spend more time being productive rather than searching for where did I put that old email.
Can I comment on that?
Guys, can you hear
I
me?
can really relate to what Al is saying. These things have preoccupied me for a very long time. And I'd like to point out that hierarchy is one of two basic methods. So Paul had a lot of folders. I have a lot of folders.
Can you guys hear me?
But the other method, which is widely available now, is tagging. A tag is a label that assigns something to a topic, but the distinction is that you can have multiple tags on the same item.
Hey, guys?
So, for example, let's say that your emails, some of them
Mark, can I just interrupt? I faintly hear Paul in the background, and he's trying to get us.
Oh,
Yeah. There's other things you're saying. I heard part of it about just managing large amounts of information. These mail threads are one tool for that, but there's a lot more to it than that. And those things that Al was saying and others, all of these are very important, and we should definitely discuss them all. But let me say a little bit more about mail threads first, and then maybe we'll get to that. So I had queued up an AOL screen to show you it has exactly the same basic structure and as we just saw twice in Outlook and Thunderbird. And then I have a Yahoo screen on, turned on. I was going to show you that, but that's just showing you what I'm saying. They all have the same basic structure. Gmail is the one that's different, and I find Gmail very frustrating to use. But what I wanted to say more about threads is that, this idea of just using the subject line to define a thread really didn't hack it. That became inadequate for various reasons. And so what happened was that eventually the people who design all this stuff, they came up with a sort of a behind and under the hood way of identifying the relationships between emails, whether they are replies to other emails or forwards from other emails, and to basically capture the information for the email thread structure in hidden header lines that users never see unless you know how to drill down and look at the raw email object, which basically most mail programs let you do. So I'm just going to try to do screen sharing one more time here, and let me bring up Thunderbird again. If this doesn't work this time, then I will switch to the laptop and just proceed from there. But I have to screen share this. So screen share just my Thunderbird. So are you seeing that?
yes.
Wait a second, let me put my earphones in so I can hear you. Okay. So again, I was showing you Thunderbird on that other thing where I hadn't gussied things up. You can do a lot of amazing stuff with Thunderbird. Just for fun, I'll show you. Here's what my actual inbox looks like. And I can turn on favorites. So I only see the ones that are my high use ones, and the nesting structure, and I've introduced colors to help me find things, and I can open and close twisties, and
Paul, what client is this?
this is all Thunderbird. But this talk is not about mail folders, as wonderful as they are. It's about mail threads. So here is an email from Joel from this morning that was in reply to an email from Tom Pate. And you can see Tom sent email to Joel and me. This was actually during the program this morning. And Joel replied to him. And then I replied to Joel, knowing that it would go to Tom as well. And then Tom replied to me. So it's a very simple email thread. So how does, email threads don't actually have to have the same subject line these days. But, I could look around. For the most part, people don't change the subject lines very much in the middle of a conversation, but certainly it happens, and for very good reasons. So here's the way it works, and you might find this sort of thing interesting. Oh yeah, okay. So this email from me, I'm selecting it there, and look down in the lower right-hand corner. I can click this More button, and I can say View Source. Do you see that? No, you don't. So in order for this demo to work, I have to stop the screen share, because that actually popped up a new window, so that wasn't being shared. So I have to do screen share again, and I have to screen share my whole screen. Can you see my whole screen?
We do.
Okay, good. So again, there's this More button, and I can say View Source. Or I can actually, notice I can change the border between my sort of inbox summary at the top and the body of the selected email at the bottom. That's typical in these mail programs. But once I have one that's open, well, again, there's a More button, and I can click View Source. View Source. Now, the comparable action in another mail program might use different words. It might say raw email or whatever. But basically, it's a way of popping up a plain text window that shows the actual data object that is transferred from one person's computer to the others. And it's pretty remarkable. I mean, well, first of all, let me give you a quick tour through what you're going to see here. I mean, remember I said that an email consists of header lines, and each header line has a keyword or a field name and a colon and then some information. It is possible for there to be wrapping if the information is very long. If the next line starts with white space, then it's regarded as a continuation. So this received, the information on the received line is all of that. And then there's all kinds of things. This is actually a reasonably short one. This is a very short one, because there can be hundreds of header lines for various reasons that I won't go into right now. But the really core basic ones are, you'll see them. There's the date, and then here's the subject. The order doesn't matter in the header lines. And then who it's from. But the two lines that I want to show you right now, which are critical, is the message ID line. So every email that's sent by anybody's mail program, unless it is truly an archaic mail program and not compliant with today's email standards, basically unworkable. But every email gets assigned a message ID line, and this is a unique string in the entire universe, because it actually has a date encoded in there, and some random stuff, and the source and da 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 da. It could never occur at another place. It's a unique identifier, and there's another line called references. And this means that this email makes reference to an earlier email, and it gives the message ID strings for those other emails that this one is in reference to. And I think that yeah, so in other words, that would be the message ID of its immediate parent in that tree structure, and and going back all the way to the beginning of the email thread. So email threads these days are defined, as far as the mail data objects are concerned and the mail programs that are displaying them. The email threads are defined by message ID lines and references lines, period. So it makes no difference whether you change the subject or even change the recipients entirely. And by the way, you cannot alter the message ID or the references lines. None of the mail programs let you do that. The old Unix programs let me do that to my heart's content, and I had fun playing with that stuff. But no, that's cast in stone. So now you understand, how email threads come about. All mail programs, follow these same directives. I mean, there's a standard setting body somewhere who sat down for a long period of time and got input from all of the major players and companies, universities, and hammered out the standards, what are called standards. And anybody can write mail software, but they have to adhere to those standards. They have to use the same interfaces, the same field names. They have to do the same actions. They have to have the same meaning, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why email is basically interchangeable across all different vendors and all different software types and so on and so forth. The underlying structure has to comply with what what you're seeing now. So as I say, okay, so that's I think you get the idea. Mail threads can be your friend, help you manage a lot of complicated mail, and there's other things you can do with them. For instance, I can drag email from one folder to another, but for instance, here's something called online website, and it's got 3 emails in it. But if that branch is closed and the twisty is turned to the right, and I drag that and put it somewhere else, I can drag that into a different folder, and it takes the whole mail thread with it. So you can imagine this is pretty helpful if you want to reorganize your mailbox, taking advantage of the thread structure and moving things from one folder to another.
Paul, this is Tom. Gmail does some of this stuff, but I get from our various
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. That's a good lead-in, because what I wanted to show you.
Well, that Thunderbird does more or different, or that's what I'm trying to understand.
That what does more?
Thunderbird, I think, does more or does.
No, it's not more or less. Gmail does a whole lot, but they don't do all the same things, which can be frustrating and confusing. Or, for me, it's a big advantage because I get the best of both. So anyway, but Gmail has a totally different view of the world. And that's a big learning curve. So here, I'm going to go to my Gmail.
I have a question.
Sure.
Where are the data stored? On the computer or in the cloud?
Good question, Andy. First of all, they're stored in the cloud. The way I'm using email, I'm using a web-based mail server called Gmail. It's the Google. Google is the company that
Right.
provides that mail service. The mail service is called Gmail, and all of the mail is in the cloud, in the Google, in
Okay.
my Google Cloud. Space in the Google Cloud that belongs to me. And but when I and normally Google would expect me to use a web browser like you're seeing here to do all my email. As far as Google is concerned, the whole world is using web browsers to get at online services, and they never run any local software. That's sort of what the Web 2.0 was all about, sort of moving services to the cloud instead of local. But anyway, so it's all in the cloud. But I prefer to use Thunderbird as a viewer of the same email, as a window into the same collection of email. So I set up my Thunderbird and I give it my login information for my Gmail account. And then Thunderbird communicates with my Gmail account. It dials it up, has the password and everything, and it downloads all of my email. And it keeps a local copy inside of Thunderbird on my computer. It's a good thing we have a lot of big disks these days. And it uses a data structure, an SQL program inside of Thunderbird, so it manages it pretty well. But those are really just copies. Those are like working copies. I can completely blow away my whole collection of local mail and just tell Thunderbird to start over again and download it all again from the cloud. So it's primarily in the cloud, and yet I have local copy here in Thunderbird because that makes my operations go really fast. If I had to actually download stuff from the cloud all the time just to view it and sort and so on and so forth, then all bets would be off. So the master copy is in the cloud, but there's actually a copy in both places. And Thunderbird doesn't even bother to sync up folders that I'm not visiting. It knows, it keeps track of which ones I'm sort of going to from day to day. If I go to one that I haven't been to for a month, guess what? It kind of stops at that moment and brings it up to date, goes off to the cloud and brings it up to date so I can see the current mail. So it's smart about that. It tries to only do what it needs to do and conserving resources and especially trying to avoid big delays, paying a lot of attention to the user interface and the user experience and not wanting, big delays. So, that's a good question, Andy. So it's both places. Anyway, so there's my inbox. In Google, you can't sort on different fields. Google always shows your email in reverse chronological order. Newest at the top. Always. Well, I like to sort it different ways. So this annoys me. I like to sort on subject. Now, it gives you a different thing. If you want to know all of the emails from Maestro Ro, what I can do is I can copy that string of text, and then I can say, I can search by email for any emails that contain that string, and there they are. Or I could go back and I could search for all emails from my wife. And I could say from here we go. Steve Varley. I'll do Steve Varley. He sends me a lot of email. We talk a lot. So it quickly finds all the emails, and it says how many, and there's so many. It's only showing the first 100 here. I could scroll on down. And then if I only wanted emails from Steve Varley, but about some subject like Zoom agenda, we have email on that subject every week. And so it instantly, sifts it down to just the ones that, oh, they're different. But you can see, if I click on one, I see the body down here. So instead of sorting and then sort of eyeballing the sorted list, you're supposed to use these search constructs instead. And, you know, they're very powerful. And I can search, I can combine, and I can search by date plus other things. You have compound searches, really, really powerful. Wildcards, all kinds of things. Anyway, where are the mail threads? As far as I can tell, I really should Google this, but I don't think I can do mail threads with Outlook. I mean, with Gmail. I mean, I can certainly look at. Oh, here's one of the stupid junk mails like we always get. I presume you get them. I get tons of these ridiculous things. I don't even know how the scam works. But anyway, look. An email display, I click more, I can say, show original. And it's a prettier presentation, but this again is the actual mail object down here. And again, you could trace through and you could find, you know, the sort of the user visible lines and all the hidden ones. By the way, these header lines tell you a whole lot about where the email came from, the IP address of the sender. If it took several hops to get to you and went through different servers, each server adds a few lines of itself, so there's kind of a traceback routing of this email. Oh my God, you can tell a whole lot of stuff about the email. And this is useful to people who want to do email troubleshooting or try to figure out why they're getting so much spam, things like that. So, you know, if somebody could tell me how to take advantage of threads in Gmail, I'd be pleased to hear it. So,
Doesn't Gmail though put things into threads almost automatically? They may not be the way you want.
oh, okay. You know, you're right, Tom. Listen. So let's, yeah.
Look in the chat box, Paul.
Yeah, it does a kind of an inline thing. I meant to say that. Maybe that's what you're saying in the chat box too. Let me find an email here that. Oh, I got a lot of folders. Inbox. Oh, Olgard. Oh, hang on. Olgard, that's the main Olgard one. Okay, so here's an email. Where's one that's going to have okay, the one with the art. And so what happens is that there's the first one, and then if I can click that, and it's a little bit like a twisty, I guess it'll open it up, and actually here I think I click and then it shows a pop-in that shows that the user visible header lines, and I kind of click on the email, or sometimes if I click on this border and then you see up and down arrows, click that, then it opens up a section of prior emails in the same thread, and then I can click on those, and sometimes there's a ... which brings in more content. Okay, yeah, somehow this is threads. Yep. But I hate this this kind of display. I'm not comfortable. I don't feel like I understand where I am. If I hit reply to something, you know, the mail that you're composing is sort of in line with all these other things, and you can minimize it. And I don't know. This is just too confusing to me. That's why I don't like this. But anyway, I don't know. You probably, you know, I'm sure some people are very comfortable with it. They've been using it a long time and they like it just fine. So I'm, I'm not being critical, really. I'm just saying it doesn't suit my taste, my skill set. I'm kind of rooted in the past, I suppose. Anybody want to make more comments along those lines?
Well, I've gotten used to it over the years just because I only use Gmail. So I kind of learned these things. There are times where I wish it would do things a little bit different, but generally I can work with it. And so my kind of dilemma at the moment, is it worth me? I only have one email address, and for a number of reasons, I have kept it that way. There are pros and cons. I understand that I could easily have more, but I find that confusing. So is it worth my while to go to something like Thunderbird if I'm only using one Gmail address? Because Thunderbird, I guess, does some different things, but a lot of the things in a different way, which maybe is easier to sort or easier
Okay,
to...
let me answer your question, Tom. Is it worth your while? And I would say, yeah, it's worth your while. There's no risk in it, you know. I mean, you can, like I do with Thunderbird. I mean, you could set up your favorite email client, maybe Apple Mail. You can maybe try.
I don't like
right?
Apple Mail.
Just
even
use
though
Apple Mail or something like this,
Yeah.
and then tell it to access your Gmail account and show that again in the context of your that mail app's own folders, and just see if you like it. Try it out. If you don't like it, you just turn it off. You know, there's no risk.
Oh, no, I didn't.
So
mean
is it
risk.
worth it in terms of how much effort it is to do? Well, you know, if you like doing this stuff, first of all, it's his own reward. I mean, it's fun. It's fascinating. We're all techies, you know. We like doing this stuff. If you don't like doing it and you had better things to do with your time and it's not pleasurable to you, then don't do it, you know.
Well, it's more that I get confused. And I have limited, I mean, I spend a lot of time on computers, but I have limited time that I want to devote to it. And it's another new thing to learn, which does things differently. And it's hard for me to adjust as I get
Absolutely.
older.
And you know, there's no problem with that. There are plenty of things that people send me, all kinds of things I should read, and you know, and eventually I say, "Oh, thank you for sending me this stuff." You know, I really don't have time to read this stuff because I really am busy 24/7, and I have a long to-do list of critical things, which is never empty. I mean,
Yes,
I wish I had time to read books, but I don't. But I give priority to certain things, and so those are the things that I do. And everybody prioritizes their own stuff.
Paul, this is Roger.
But I do find as I'm getting older that I get confused between how, I'm just using Thunderbird as an example, how Thunderbird does it versus how Gmail does it. And sometimes to simplify my life, I like to just keep doing it the way I am doing it unless there's such a problem.
That's
that
fine, Tom.
you know.
That's fine, Tom. I happen to like mail threads. So, Roger?
Hi, can I get into the conversation just briefly?
Okay.
I've been not following your advice very much. I use email threads a lot, but what I've done instead is I try to keep all my mail on my iMac. I have set up Comcast.net, which is my mail server, so that it only keeps its copy of the email for 1 week and then it deletes it. And it's my responsibility to get the stuff transferred to my iMac where I keep it under the administration of Apple
Griff,
Mail.
quick comment. Let me translate what you're saying. You're not using IMAP. You're using the POP3 protocol. That's different, but that's okay.
Yeah. So I use Apple Mail, which has a very nicely designed mail thread system. And I organize my mail by months and years, actually, figuring that most of my life is limited by months. So a thread will tend to be mostly defined by what has happened during the last month. The result is that it's very easy to keep track of conversations because the left-hand side of my screen shows a list of threads unless I click a button up on the top and tell it to show it by simply messages instead of threads. But the normal organization done by Apple Mail is to organize everything by threads.
Hey, Griff, I have a question for you. I'm not 100% certain that you're using thread in the same way that I just defined earlier, or whether you're doing something more informal on your own and you're calling it threads.
Well, maybe it's what Apple is doing and calling it a thread, but it sure looks like a thread to me.
Well, Apple, if it's doing threads at all, must surely be doing it the way I described, because that is the universal accepted way of doing threads.
It's using the identifier. Now, one thing I notice from everybody is that when they reply to somebody's mail, that they include everything that has led up to that point as the body of the message, and then they add something to the top of it, which means that I accumulate n squared over 2 copies of everything.
Can I address that one?
What?
I was going to make a comment about that phenomenon. Can I say it now?
Sure.
Yeah, one of the problems with these mail threads, when you say, reply, all, reply, or forward even, yeah, it also does, not only does it clone the subject line, but it clones the whole body of the previous mail, and it puts it down below, and maybe it puts a line on the left margin so you can tell that that was the embedded email that you're replying to. And yeah, then these, you tend to see the whole conversation all the way up to the beginning of the thread tacked on to the end of your email, so they get kind of long. And so they're taking up space, they're taking up bandwidth as they're being
well, it's also just making it more
complicated. But it's not too much space, because the transmissions are fast and computer storages are large, and people don't scroll down very far. They're not even aware how much stuff there is and how much repetitive it is. Nevertheless, you're perfectly welcome to delete as much of the past stuff as you want when you're, composing your reply to the thread, and, keep things a little more neater and tidier. But what does matter is, attachments. And I meant to say this. In the old days, if you had an attachment, you hit reply or reply all, that attachment would tag along. And then everybody would be hitting reply to that. So whatever attachments got accumulated, they would be accumulating, and some of these were big files.
Yes.
So you'd have multiple copies of big files on your computer, and computer memories and disks were not that large in those days, and communications were not that fast in old days. And so you're constantly retransmitting all this stuff that everybody already has umpteen copies of. So that was a problem. So what's the solution to that problem? Well, at least with Thunderbird, I don't know whether all the programs do this. If you do reply, yeah, it'll copy in the body of the thing you're replying to, but it will not include the attachments. No. Well, however, if you do a forward, it includes the attachments. Mm-hmm. And that's a very useful distinction. If I really want that attachment to go to somebody that I don't think already has it, I do a forward, not a reply. I mean, you could set up a reply, and then you could drag and drop an attachment into it, and you could sort of, do this by hand.
What Apple Mail does with this is it just sends, as part of the reply, it sends back the name of the photo, and that's it. It's just a note that these attachments were sent.
Well, there are a lot of strategies.
The photos were this.
There are a lot of strategies that these companies use to try to reduce the bandwidth and the size and da-da-da-da. And that's a typical one, that they will actually not include the images themselves in the email. Or the big PowerPoint files or whatever. Instead, they'll leave it on server, and they'll put a link in the email, so the moment you click on it, it appears because it downloads it at that moment. That's a typical strategy. It's fine, I guess, but You know, what if you're offline when you want to read this stuff? That doesn't work. You know, I mean, there's sometimes reasons.
My policy almost universally is that I highlight a block of text, which is the part that I would like to comment in for the continuation of the thread. And then Apple Mail composes a reply which has just the section that I highlighted.
You know, it's ironic you say that, Griff, because it turns out Thunderbird does that too, but I only learned about it 2 days ago by accident. It's a nice feature.
I almost universally use this approach. I might make a thread consisting of a comment and an addition to it. That becomes the new entry at the top of the thread. And if someone else wants to reproduce the whole thing, I wish they wouldn't, but I at least have cut the size down. And if I make any further comments on this, I'm going to highlight the part that I wish to make another comment about, and then I will.
Hey Griff, hey Griff, you know, sorry to interrupt you, but you know, what you're saying is interesting. It's mostly of interest to Apple people, and it would be, and we don't have much time. It's already 1:20, and I hate to cut off an interesting conversation, but you know, maybe you could do a demo and talk a little bit more and show us what you can do in the Apple world along these lines, the way I was just doing. But you know, we just can't keep talking about this all day. Does anybody else have a different kind of comment to make?
I've said my point anyway.
Well, let's do that again, Griff. We're just running out of time. That's all. I don't want to cut you off. But
what I'm doing is I have 4 accounts, and I have them. And when I watch my email, I have them all together because I take inbox, everyone, all of them together. Yeah. This way, and then of course I erase what I really don't need, most of it, incidentally, and then I erase that too. Well, that's about it.
You know, okay, so you know, Andy, that's a good point you're bringing up.
What?
You're bringing up a good point. How can one manage one's excessive amount of email that's flowing in like a fire hose all the time, right, and you've got years worth of it accumulated, filling up? And now, how do you get it all under control? Now, we've had talks like that before, and but the problem is always with us. And I think we should do it again soon. And I'll just toss out this little teaser. I have, been assiduous in always unsubscribing to things unless they really look like crap, you know, like trying to unsubscribe would be useless because it's a scam anyway, you know. But I do, and so I've managed to minimize the amount of, I don't call it junk mail, you know, it's unsolicited commercial email, UCE, which is sort of like legitimate spam, you know, it's like commercial, it's kind of ads and, you know, notices from organizations you have some relationship with. It's not really spam, but trouble is there's just too much of it, you know. And if I got 200 emails that day in my inbox and 5 of them are important emails having to do with Oakart, you know, I waste a lot of time just sifting through this. So anyway, I recently discovered that there's a feature in Gmail which is very useful for categorizing the mail in your inbox and separating out the email which Gmail thinks, and using an algorithm, it separates what it calls your primary email from what it regards as updates, social media postings, promotions, and there's a 4th one I'm missing, is another category. Technically, these emails are still in your inbox, but they've been flagged by Gmail, and optionally you can say organize my inbox by category, and then those emails will appear in like pseudo folders within your inbox, leaving only the primary stuff that you really got to pay attention to right now, you know, there, and it gets the rest out of your face. Now, the trouble with that feature is It's not a label. It's not really a folder, and you cannot see it through IMAP. In other words, Thunderbird can't take advantage of that categorization. But last week I found a way to do that. So I turned this on, and lo and behold, instantly my inbox was free of clutter. All of the stuff that I didn't want to see immediately was gone. I thought I was in email nirvana. I only saw the relevant stuff and none of the less important stuff. Their algorithm is really good. And boy, did it ever clear up my Thunderbird inbox. Anyway, that's a talk for another day if you're interested.
I'm interested also where to start, because my computers are all full of memory, and that's why I'm concerned.
Well, Andy, we're talking at sort of a high level here in generalities, but, if you'd like some help in actually sort of wrangling your mailbox and trying to, get it under control, I'd be happy to sort of meet with you, by Zoom or something and screen sharing. And, I'm sure I could give you some useful pointers.
Good.
Anybody else?
Okay, Jim Landwehr has his hand up.
Yeah, just my own experience. When I was in the corporate world, why these threads and all that was very useful, and I used them, and it did help to organize things. And then now that I've been retired and switched over to Gmail, Gmail has, as I think maybe Mark mentioned, it's really, I do have the conversation threading on. So Gmail automatically organizes things into conversations. So things that only go 4 or 5 emails, they get put together and it's fine. I can find them and they don't take up extra space.
Wait, Jim, let me just say, I think I have not found that feature yet, so I'm going to look for it.
It's in the chat. Joel put it down there. If you go to Gmail and settings at the bottom, there's something called conversation folder. And I use that. And I also use the promotion, social, and primary things. And that keeps, Google does a very good job of putting stuff in the right place. And if they make a mistake, I can move it around. So that means my primary inbox is not overloaded, even though I may get a fair number of promotion emails in a day.
Yeah, great.
But then the final thing I was just going to add is I started when I started using Gmail all the time, I created these folders and I would put tags on things and put them into these folders. And like Mark said, you can actually put it on more than one tag. So you can have thing in multiple folders, like Al said, either railroads or music or whatever.
Right.
And that could be useful. But then over time, I discovered that the search capability is so good in Gmail that if I really want something, I can find it pretty quickly through their search capabilities. So I've just kind of stepped away from using these tags even, and I just treat it as one big mess and deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. In effect, every single word in an email is a tag.
Yeah.
Because every word is searchable in Gmail. It's really great.
Al Aho has his hand up.
Just a bit of trivia. I discovered that in this year, 333 billion emails are sent per day worldwide.
And they're all struggling with too much spam.
Yes. Well, I think we will obviously have to continue this conversation. Paul, we'll have to talk and figure out what next step would be. We have time in the schedule, so I'm sure we can schedule something else soon. But it's hard to envision and to cut down these topics to something that we can cover in an hour and a half or whatever. It's just, it's all so interrelated. It's hard to organize.
I think
we
nailed email threads pretty well.
Yes, no, I do too. I do too. And thank you very much for doing that.